Coming up on Arirang News, the United States military returns 4 of its bases to South Korean control. The Allies also start work to return the garrison in central Seoul that'll one day become a national park. The South Korean government gives a grace period to smaller companies who next month would have had to limit the work week to 52 hours. They'll have another year to adjust to the new limits. And emergency measures are in place in Seoul and numerous other cities because of very bad levels of air pollution. Senior citizens, a report finds, are especially vulnerable and should take precautions. It's 4:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. There have been countless delays over the years in returning to South Korean control the installations and bases used by American forces stationed on the peninsula. But now the South Korean government says there's been progress on that front. Our Kim Ji-yeon joins us with the latest. Ji-yeon?
Yes, Devin. 4 U.S. bases sites South Korea requested be returned in August have been returned to South Korea as of 2 p.m. today. Those 4 bases are Camp Seagull and Long in Wonju, Camp Market in Bupyeong, and Camp Hovey in Dongducheon-dashi Range. Their return have been delayed due to a disagreement between South Korea and the U.S. in determining which side is responsible for the costs of decontaminating polluted parts of the bases. The 2 sides agreed that at the 200th Joint Committee meeting of the Status of Forces Agreement at Camp Humphreys, the bases be returned on the condition that they continue consultations on responsibilities for base decontamination. As of now, the government estimates the costs to cleanse the 4 bases is more than $92 million US, but it added that the estimate is subject to change once they conduct detailed surveys of the bases. The lion's share of the costs is due to dioxin pollution of Camp Market. For now, it looks though the costs are to be shouldered by the South Korean government unless it makes progress in the negotiating talks with the U.S. And according to a briefing held by the Office for Government Policy Coordination along with the Defense, Foreign Affairs, and Environment Ministries that just ended half an hour ago, there has been progress in the negotiations and that the U.S. has agreed to discuss about which country is to pay for the costs, something that was a non-negotiable subject for the past decade. And up until now, the U.S. has cited its KISE principle, which is an acronym for the known imminent substantial endangerment to human health, a standard the Korean side had to prove in order for the U.S. to consider paying the costs associated with the return of the U.S. bases. And the government says the part about the pollution costs has not been detailed in the Status of Forces Agreement, the SOFA agreement. Now the U.S. has positively responded to such discussions, given the common understanding that the prompt return of the bases is imperative to public health, and delaying the bases return further could endanger the livelihoods of the community. And the officials at the briefing stated today talks were not impacted by the defense cost-sharing talks between South Korea and the U.S. And concerning the return of the Yongsan garrison that is to become a national park, the officials said the return process has been initiated as some of the U.S. bases are being moved to Camp Humphreys, a U.S. military complex in Pyeongtaek, south of Seoul. Further details on when the process is to be complete were not relayed in today's briefing. Back to you, Devin.
All right, Kim Ji-yeon reporting there. Thank you. Now, the air quality in Seoul today is at levels officially considered very bad. The government's already taken emergency measures in the capital and has expanded those to 7 other cities and provinces. A report released today finds that air pollution is especially dangerous to the elderly. Lee Min-sun reports.
The sky in Seoul continues to be covered with thick dust, and it is hard to breathe comfortably on Wednesday. Emergency fine dust reduction measures have been imposed for a second straight day in Seoul and its surrounding areas and in Chungcheongbuk-do province. The fine dust level in Seoul hit 138 micrograms per cubic meter, and it was 164 in Incheon and 125 in Gyeonggi-do province as of Wednesday morning. A fine dust level between 81 to 150 is considered bad, and anything above 150 is considered very bad. The Ministry of Environment has issued additional measures in 7 more cities and provinces, including Busan and Daegu for Wednesday, as fine dust levels are expected to be bad or very bad across the entire nation until later in the day. In an effort to reduce air pollution, Grade 5 emission vehicles, mainly diesel vehicles, will be banned from the road until 9 p.m., except for in Daegu and Chungcheongbuk-do province. The operation of public sector vehicles and public sector workers' vehicles with license plates ending in even numbers is also prohibited. Meanwhile, research shows that ultrafine dust can lead to elderly people dying prematurely, and the number of deaths from air pollution is expected to rise in the coming years. A policy report by the Seoul Institute said ultrafine dust was to blame for the premature death of 1,763 Seoul citizens in 2015. The report added that an increase of 10 micrograms per cubic meter in the annual average ultrafine dust level brings it a 14% higher risk of death for people aged over 65.
When fine dust or ultrafine dust enters the body, it first causes an inflammatory reaction, and the inflammation affects the lungs or blood vessels and increases lung, cardiovascular, or cerebrovascular disease. And because of the aging population, the same amount of exposure can cause more deaths in the future.
With Seoul's aging population, the report projected that air quality will have a greater influence on people's health in the future and called for more concrete measures from both local and international communities. The air quality is expected to improve on Thursday, but most parts of the country will instead see a cold wave and strong winds. Lee Min-sun, Arirang News.
In other news, the U.S. is now trying to get Russia to lend a hand in denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula. But Moscow's top diplomat says North Korea and the U.S. need to take reciprocal steps to move forward. Kan Hyung-woo reports.
U.S. President Donald Trump has urged Russia to support Washington's efforts to ensure North Korea abandons its nuclear weapons. That's according to a White House readout after the U.S. leader met on Tuesday with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in the Oval Office. Earlier in the day, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo held a press conference with his Russian counterpart and expressed how unfazed Washington is about the stalled talks despite the North's recent missile tests.
As for our expectations with respect to North Korea's behavior, I think President Trump's been unambiguous about our expectation. Chairman Kim personally made the commitment to denuclearize, said there wouldn't be long-range missile tests, nuclear tests. All of those are commitments that we are very hopeful that the North Koreans will continue to abide by.
Pompeo said Washington continues to look for ways to communicate with the North to negotiate a path toward denuclearization. The top U.S. diplomat added, both the U.S. and Russia are determined to help the North Koreans get there, so they can have the brighter future that President Trump has spoken about so often. But Lavrov called for reciprocal steps by Washington and Pyongyang to make progress, saying denuclearization negotiations cannot be lopsided.
I have said that before, and I will say it again. It is not realistic to expect North Korea to do everything that the U.S. wants them to do.
The U.S. and Russia are both veto-wielding permanent members of the UN Security Council, meaning they can prevent the adoption of any substantive resolution against North Korea. Kan Hyung-woo, Arirang News.
The U.S. Special Representative for North Korea, Stephen Biegun, will attend a UN Security Council session on North Korea on Wednesday. The State Department said Tuesday that Biegun will travel to New York to join UN Ambassador Kelly Craft, who will lead the session as Council President. Washington requested the meeting to get a comprehensive update on recent developments on the Korean Peninsula, including the regime's missile launches and the possibility of a larger-scale provocation. Biegun will meet with UN permanent representatives prior to the Council session during a lunch hosted by Ambassador Craft. The arrangement of the meeting is seen as a way for the U.S. to pressure North Korea after Pyongyang conducted what it claims was a very important test, widely believed to be a solid fuel engine for an ICBM. President Moon Jae-in has asked South Korea's newly appointed ambassadors to do their best to gather international support for the peace process on the Korean Peninsula. He said this earlier today at the Blue House while delivering certificates of appointment to 14 ambassadors, including the new ambassador to the U.S., Lee Soo-hyuk. President Moon said all countries are important to Korea, emphasizing the need to expand cooperation with them in all areas, including the economy and culture. He especially highlighted that their roles are no longer limited to diplomacy, but that their noteworthy policies serve as benchmarks in revising Korea's own. The coach of Vietnam's national football team, Hang-seo, a South Korean, has done amazing things for the team in his 2 years at the helm. The latest, a gold medal for Vietnam's under-23 squad at the Southeast Asian Games. Lee Seung-jae reports.
Leading the under-22 Vietnamese national football team at the Southeast Asian Games, their South Korean head coach Park Hang-seo continued his successful run, this time claiming Vietnam's first gold medal in 60 years. After going undefeated with 6 wins and 1 draw, Park's team defeated Indonesia 3-0 on Tuesday night to grab the top podium spot. But Park's gold medal finish at the Southeast Asian Games is just the latest in a line of accomplishments with Vietnam. Dubbed the Park Hang-seo Magic, the South Korean head coach began his legendary run when he was tapped to lead Vietnam in October 2017. So how much of an impact has Park had since taking over? Before Park's tenure, Vietnam was ranked 121st in the FIFA rankings, but now stand at 94th. Vietnam's previous best-ever result at the AFC U23 tournament was qualifying, but under Park's stewardship, the team were runners-up in January 2018. Vietnam's previous best-ever result at the Asian Games was a top 16 finish, but Park guided his players to the semifinals last year. Under his leadership, Vietnam also claimed their first Suzuki Cup title in 10 years in December 2018. But there's little time for Park to bask in his latest glory. With the 2020 AFC U23 Championships taking place in January, the team is still looking to qualify for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. Vietnam are also top of their group in qualifying for the 2022 World Cup, so the Vietnamese people hope Park's magic touch could lead them to even greater success in the years to come. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Starting in January, smaller South Korean companies would have also had to start following the new law limiting the work week to 52 hours. But the government has announced that it'll give them a grace period of another year so they can adjust. Some small and mid-sized firms would have had a hard time because they need extra hours during busy seasons and when emergencies come up. Kim Hae-sung reports.
The government will provide a 1-year grace period on implementing the 52-hour workweek for small and mid-sized companies with fewer than 300 employees. During the period, small companies will not be under government oversight over the implementation of the 52-hour workweek. At the same time, the government will grant special extensions of work for cases like saving lives in emergency situations or for R&D purposes on top of existing permissions like in the case of disasters.
Additional reasons for work time extension include safety urgent responses to emergency situations like sudden machine malfunctions or a temporary surge in workload that could affect business operations or cause huge losses.
The labor minister said these special grants will be applied to not just small businesses but to all companies in Korea. The 52-hour workweek is one of President Moon Jae-in's campaign pledges as part of efforts to improve the work-life balance for laborers, tackle the low fertility rate, and enhance productivity by cutting the number of maximum working hours from 6 to 8. It went into effect in July 2018 for companies with more than 300 employees with a 6-month grace period extended to 9 months for exceptional cases. The 52-hour workweek for smaller companies is currently scheduled to take effect next month. Citing a loss in productivity and a possible increase in labor costs, more than half of all small and mid-sized companies said they're not ready for the 52-hour workweek, according to a survey by the Korea Federation of SMEs last October. Following the government's announcement on Wednesday, business circles, including the Korea Enterprises Federation, said the government's measures will help companies cope with the 52-hour workweek, but said detailed measures that take into consideration differences across industries will be needed. But labor groups criticized the announcement. Federation of Korean Trade Unions said increasing the number of exceptional cases to grant special work time extensions violates basic rights, and it vowed to file a constitutional appeal. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
South Korea saw a rise in the number of employed people last month of more than 330,000 compared to a year earlier. The employment rate hit a 23-year high. But things are still tough in the manufacturing sector and for people in their 40s. Our Hong-yoo reports.
The number of newly employed people on year has been above 300,000 for 4 straight months now, with 331,000 more people employed in November than in the same month the previous year. The employment rate for people aged between 15 and 64 also increased 0.3 percentage points to 61.7%, the highest sin for the month of November since 1989. But the increase was mainly due to newly created jobs for older people, and the job slump hasn't ended for people in their 40s. In fact, the employment rate actually decreased by 1.1 percentage points for people aged between 40 and 49.
For employment to increase for the working population in their 40s, males need to actively look for work in the social welfare service sector. This is because the majority of workers in their 40s are males, and they're highly concentrated in the manufacturing sector, which is seeing weakening employment rates.
Breaking it by sector, employment increased mostly in the health and social welfare service sector, followed by the accommodation and restaurant sectors and leisure-related services. But employment for the wholesale and retail sectors, construction and manufacturing all decreased. The manufacturing sector, which is considered the backbone of South Korea's economy, has been shedding jobs now for 20 straight months. The finance ministry says that is mainly due to the slump in exports. Despite the fall in certain sectors, the ministry says the steady decline in the jobless rate is a sign of a recovery in the job market. But uncertainties persist due to the shrinking population and external economic conditions. Hong-yoo, Arirang News.
South Korea's National Assembly on Tuesday passed next year's budget bill worth around $430 billion. The original bill proposed by the government underwent some changes during the National Assembly's plenary session. The budget for health and welfare and the industry and energy budget were cut slightly, while more money was set aside for agriculture, food, and social overhead capital. Under social overhead capital, the Assembly increased the budget for building several highways. The military budget was a record $42 billion, a 7.4% increase on year. It focuses on improvements in defense capacity by increasing the budget for researching and implementing new systems. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Kim Myung-han, professor of economics at Sungkyunkwan University. Dr. Kim, thank you for coming on today.
I'm happy to be with you.
Well, as we just heard, the South Korean parliament's passed the budget for next year worth around 512 trillion won, or about $430 billion. It's the biggest budget in the country's history. What does this mean for the Korean economy?
Well, we can say this kind of super-sized kind of budget has been mainly motivated by quite a sluggish performance of the Korean macroeconomic kind of activities. And as the latest kind of statistics says, the economic growth rate this year seems to fall below 2%, almost near to 1.8%. That is the kind of lowest economic growth rate in Asia except Japan. And also the leading industry, especially Korean export industry, has shown quite a poor performance throughout this year and showing the biggest drop in last month, that is around drop by 14.3%. And all these signs says that quite a kind of dismal picture for the future of the Korean economy, with the strong signal that not just a cyclical downturn, but a serious kind of a signal of the loss of the industrial competitiveness. So in that context, I think that the government actions and decision to increase the government expenditure, mainly to boost up the industrial competitiveness itself, might be a correct, is going in a correct directions. But also, there is an increasing concerns and criticism that this size budget is highly kind of unorganized in terms of the massive part of the just one-shot government expenditure in the kind of unorganized welfare kind of ends. So in that context, I think the government should be more organized and strategic in terms of the actual kind of implementation of this super kind of size kind of budget, especially focusing on recovering industrial competitiveness of the major export industry and also new industry related to 5G industries.
Right. Well, Dr. Kim, on Christmas Eve, to switch gears here, there'll be a three-way summit between China, South Korea, and Japan. It's not clear yet whether there'll be bilateral meetings as well, but do you think this summit could lead to better external conditions for Korea's economy?
Yes, definitely, although we cannot expect a real material kind of agreement outcome just from this coming trilateral summit, but still, it is quite an important ice-breaking kind of phase after such a long and really intense kind of conflict and tension, especially between South Korea and Japan, and also, say, with China. In addition to traditional kind of tensions over the military kind of issues, still with increasing threat from North Korean side, kind of close collaboration between South Korea and China might provide lots of rooms to kind of soothe and calm down the possible increase in the kind of regional tension in Korean Peninsula. And I would say, especially if a bilateral summit is arranged between Japan and South Korea, probably I think this is a very good time to make some change in the general kind of mode of the two countries' collaboration. And I would say Japan has already achieved their political goal after taking their export control on the core part and components used in the Korean semiconductor industries. Since they have already achieved their goal with the kind of massive political support from their kind of voters, I think Japan is also seeking to some smooth exit from these tensions. So I think this is very high time for both countries to make some changes in terms of their collaboration and recover more kind of close relationship, and not only in the political context, but also in economic collaboration too.
All right, one last question. The Federal Reserve is holding this month's regular meeting of the Federal Open Market Committee, the last one of the year. What do you see coming out of this meeting?
Well, so when we consider the current interest rate, I think there is little room for them to make further kind of cut in the federal rate. But still, there is increasing concerns about this kind of uncertainties and kind of increasing volatilities especially in international economic environment, mainly caused by the Donald Trump's kind of unpredictable actions, especially increasing the tension in international trade relationship. But however, so even if there is a little room for us to expect a concrete measure in terms of reducing interest rates, still I would expect that federal, Fed meeting will make a clear statement that it will take every possible actions in case they observe additional material signs of economic downturn. So, although in short, although we cannot expect real material action in short terms, but still they will make a clear statement that they will have heavy involvement in case there is a material signal for any possible downturn, which is highly worried factors in next year.
We'll be watching that closely for sure. All right, Dr. Kim, we'll have to leave it there for today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, the Trump administration may have given the green light to the Phase 1 trade deal with China. It's considering a delay for the new 15% tariffs on Beijing. Quoting U.S. officials on Tuesday, the Wall Street Journal reported that the U.S. might postpone the 15% tariffs on Chinese-made consumer goods scheduled to take effect on Sunday. However, President Trump's top economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, on Tuesday downplayed the report, saying the December tariffs are, quote, still on the table. After months of negotiations, the U.S., Mexico, and Canada have signed a new revised North American Free Trade Pact, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, which is the new name for the renegotiated NAFTA Pact, was passed on Tuesday after U.S. Democrats pressed for changes, particularly to strengthen enforcement of new Mexican labor laws. U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, Canadian Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, and Mexico's Undersecretary for North America, Jesus Seade, took part in the signing in Mexico City. The three countries agreed to make changes to several passages, including labor, steel, and aluminum trade, as well as quicker access to generic drugs. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.